Hi guys, my name is Maciek, and it's actually funny that the guys put me right behind Kacper from Uber, because a couple of years back I was being recruited by Uber and I ended up failing the famous math test. So I didn't end up working at Uber. I wasn't as smart as Kacper, so I ended up starting my own company. So now I'm a CEO and founder of a company called Safary, and we created a series of events called Startup Safary. I'm going to give you a brief idea of how it all came to be, how these events started. But before I do that, I want to give you an overview of why we do that. I want to explain why we're building what we're building. And in order to do that, I need to take perhaps 2 steps back to something that's happening right now. I believe that there's something very important happening in the recent years, meaning that our economy is going through a major shift, something that I like to think of as the next iteration of the economy. So what I think of what our economy looked like previously, the previous iteration was an economy based on large organizations. You can think of a large organization as a corporation, which were created to capture 2 resources that are necessary to create any project, any innovation. And these resources are talent, so people who know how to solve problems, how to do things, and capital. So all of these resources are necessary to make things happen. And traditionally, these 2 resources were captured in a silo of a large organization, a corporation or a government, military, and so on. And in these large organizations, there are people with formal authority, executives, leaders, who have the formal power to decide where these resources are being allocated, which projects they're being invested in, and which projects are not getting these resources. That's how traditionally our economy has worked in recent years. But what's happening now is that we're developing a new model, a model based out of a startup ecosystem, something that I like to call ecosystem-based economy. In an ecosystem-based economy, these 2 necessary resources for any project are free-floating. So you have talent and capital available to the community, and entrepreneurs who have enough charisma can capture both of them and create companies, then with these companies create innovation and therefore create products. But there are no people with formal authority, formal power that could decide which entrepreneur will succeed at raising capital and attracting talent and who will not. The people who are making these decisions don't have formal authority to do so. They have informal authority to do so. They're members of the community. They're members of the community who are respected by the community and who are listened to by the community. So to give you an idea what I'm talking about, let's say that Peter Thiel or Mark Andreessen, famous investors, would tomorrow say, okay, we're super bullish about Bitcoin and we're going to invest in Bitcoin right now. What will happen is that they will make some small investments, but the community of other investors who respect these guys, they will also start investing more in these kind of companies, which means that as a whole, as an industry, we'll start allocating more resources into this area. But it also works with the talent. If people speak well about your company, if your company has a reputation of great culture, a great company, it will be easier to attract great people. More people will want to work with you. So this has a tangible effect on who can succeed, who cannot succeed. The reputation is a very, very important aspect of how these ecosystems work. And when I think of things like that, I like to simplify them as much as possible. And the startup ecosystem pretty much breaks down to 4 key elements, 4 basic elements that go into an ecosystem. So the first one is, of course, the capital provider. So it would be VCs, private equity, angels, crowdfunding, crowd investing, loans, and so on and so on. All those sources from which you can get capital for a project. The second one, the talent. So people who could work for you as employees, but also freelancers, agency, consultants, all of these educational institutions that educate people into how to solve problems. It will be captured by talent. And then there are innovators. You would usually think of these guys as startups, but despite having startup in the name of my own product, I really don't like this word. Because the thing is that startups are very ambiguous. When you think a startup, it's usually a small, young company. But not only small young companies create disruptive innovation, there are also individuals or fairly large companies that are still innovative. So I like to call them innovators, and the way I would define them is that these are companies that are very good at trying new things. And then finally, there is a fourth element, which are distributors. Traditionally, large companies that are very good at doing the same things repeatedly. So they're not really good at coming up with new ideas, testing them, but they're very good at putting them up to scale and bringing them to masses. And these four elements work really well together because underlying is a community. A community that's driven by reputation. So if you behave well in this community, in this ecosystem, other people will want to work with you. So they're incentivized to keep their reputation up. And this is a very efficient system, meaning that those who are good at creating disruptive innovation, they can focus on that, and they can run experiments faster and cheaper. So they can run more experiments, and they can run more experiments, they will also succeed with more experiments, and there is going to be more innovation coming out of that. Large companies are better at distribution, so they can focus on that and drive the innovation from smaller companies and bring them to masses. So this model is just more efficient, therefore it will create more innovation, more wealth, more equal access to opportunities. As a society, we just allocate our resources better. But there is something I'm much more excited about than the fact that it leads to more innovation, more wealth. It also leads to better communities and therefore a better society altogether. Because you see, our behavior is shaped by incentives. And here in Poland, we know it very well because we used to live in a communist system. And the society in the communist system was much harsher than what we have today. People were less friendly, people were more tolerant towards tricking others, towards screwing others over. And the transformation period, this has been changing. And now we're living in a different system that incentivizes more ethical behaviors. And it's not perfect, but it's better. And the society became more friendly and more better, more ethical. The thing is that in large organizations, the ethical behavior is not always rewarded. So in a large organization, you win by getting promoted. So you get more formal power, you get more money, you get more formal authority. But getting promoted is not always the result of being the best at what you do or being the most ethical person in the organization. Usually, you have to be good at politics. And if you're good at politics, you get promoted, so you get ahead. What this leads to is that in a large organization, even people who want to behave ethically, they see that this behavior is not necessarily rewarded. So this drives them towards repeating the behaviors that are being rewarded, that are being incentivized towards. In a startup ecosystem, the way you succeed is by having good reputation, by repeatedly behaving well, and over time you benefit from that. So we create better incentives for a better community. So I believe that it's a really good thing that's happening and that these ecosystems are popping up all over the world, but I believe that it should be happening faster. And I've been thinking quite a bit what's slowing down the growth of these ecosystems. There are three major elements. So first of all, as these ecosystems grow, they need more people to work in them. So they need more people to work in startups, but they also need more founders, they need more investors, and so on. And getting into a startup ecosystem is not always easy. Finding a job with a startup is a completely different process than getting hired by a large organization or a government. Building a startup as a founder is a completely different ballgame than building a traditional type of a company. Even investing in startups, if you had made your money outside of startup ecosystem, is quite tricky because you have to understand how the community works, you have to build network to drive deal flow. So it all takes time and it's not that easy. Finally, the second point is that there needs to be more relevant connections within these ecosystems so that the community works better. And by more relevant connections, I not only mean that entrepreneurs need to be connected to investors so they can raise money from them. Entrepreneurs need to know entrepreneurs, investors need to know investors, CTOs need to know CTOs, and so on, so that they can talk to each other, they can talk about the good actors and the bad actors in the ecosystem to eliminate the first and promote the others. They need to exchange knowledge so that there's a faster proliferation of good practices, and so on. And finally, there's a third aspect, that these ecosystems need to connect to one another, because as they pop up all over the world, as there are hundreds of them now and there are going to be thousands of them soon, there is inevitable specialization happening. So there are some ecosystems that are very good at gaming, some ecosystems that are very good at fintech, some ecosystems that are very good at hardware, and so on. They can benefit from working together. But another thing is that ecosystems also always have their own strengths and weaknesses. So to give you an example, Berlin, where I live, if we had more developers, the ecosystem would grow faster because startups are suffocating from the lack of enough technical talent. At the same time, in Kiev, in Ukraine, there are plenty of developers. But what they lack is the fact that they don't have enough people with sales and marketing acumen who speak good English and know how to build sales or marketing operations abroad. In Poland, it's a similar situation. We also don't have enough investors with growth stage companies experience. At the same time, in places like Zurich, they have plenty of capital, experienced international executives, and technical talent, but they don't have entrepreneurial culture, so they don't have enough founders. So all of these ecosystems can benefit from working with each other. They can drive synergies from being closely connected to each other. So to illustrate that, let me use my own personal experience to one of these problems. So 4 years ago, I arrived in Berlin. And I arrived there without a specific plan. So I wasn't sure if I would work in a startup, if I would build a company, but I knew that I wanted to know more about what's happening in the startup ecosystem because there was lots of talk about that and lots of interesting companies. So I started going to meetups. Actually, in the first month, I went to 30 events in 1 month. So I was going, almost every evening I was going to an event. And I would go talk to people and say, hey, I'm Maciek, I'm new here, I would love to learn more about what's happening with startups here. To which I would usually hear, oh shit, I was actually hoping you would tell me because I arrived 3 days ago. So we were a bunch of clueless people standing next to each other, sipping beer and not really like finding out too much. But it was quite fun, not very productive. So I figured, okay, I'm gonna try a different approach. I went to a conference. And there I met a bunch of people who were building startups or working some interesting projects or were investors. But as soon as they found out that I wasn't doing anything interesting, I noticed that I lost their eye contact and they were looking somewhere behind me. And right after, there was somebody they really needed to talk to. And it kept happening over and over again. So I thought, what if I could just go to a bunch of companies that seemed kind of interesting, go to their office, chat with their team, see what they're working on, how they're working, what's the vibe in the space, touch things. The problem with that idea was that if you go to somebody's office and you start touching things and asking questions, they're not necessarily super excited about this fact. Fortunately enough, I wasn't the only one who kind of wanted to do that. So me and a friend of mine who was in a similar situation back then thought, okay, let's get like 30 people and go together and then convince a couple of companies to actually give us a tour, tell us about what they're doing. So we did that and everybody really loved that. So people who took part, they loved it. The companies who took part, they loved it. And we didn't really think too much of it, but we kept doing that. So we took it to a couple of cities. And at some point, we're doing so many of these that it started taking a lot of our time, so much that we realized, okay, we either have to stop doing this hobby and find real jobs or see if we can turn this somehow into a company or into a business. But we had no idea how we could turn a tour for 30 people into a business. We realized we have to change these numbers if we're about to do that. And that's how the first Startup Safary Berlin was born. So instead of a tour for 30 people, we decided it's going to be day of open doors, and we convinced 100 companies to open their doors, invite people in, and talk about what they do, how they do it. We had 1,000 euros marketing budget to promote this idea, which we spent on printing a couple of hundreds of posters that we did not end up hanging up. So a friend of mine still has this really nice wallpaper in the garage in our red, lots of balloons. By the way, money well spent. By the way, the poster campaign idea, mine. But despite that, we sold almost 1,000 tickets to the event that was taking place for the first time. It all happened through social media. If over 200 people came from Poland, they organized themselves. And then we brought it to Athens, where we had 2,000 attendees for the first edition. Since then, we've expanded to 10 cities. Next week, our event is taking place for the first time in Budapest. That's our 11th city. And at this point, we understand that there seems to be a significant problem that not only I had and not only the 29 other people that went with us on the first tour, but it seems to be a growing problem because there is a growing trend with startup ecosystems becoming more and more important. So we're trying to help to solve this problem. Then it's difficult to join a startup ecosystem. And therefore, and the way we're trying to do that is by creating events that lower these barriers of entry, create events that make it easier to understand who are the players in these ecosystems and connect to them. And we're doing this because we want to help these ecosystems grow faster, because we believe that it will lead to more innovation, more wealth for everybody, more equal chances, and most importantly, to better society. So that's pretty much it from me. Please follow me on Twitter. I'm going to be very happy. And if you have any questions, I'm super happy to answer them.
Any questions to Maciek?
How is Warsaw different how is Warsaw different from Berlin as a startup scene? How is Warsaw different?
Now or back then? Yeah. Well, so I would say that Berlin is becoming like a hub for Central Eastern Europe, or for Central Europe to be more precise, meaning that the ecosystem around Europe seems to be forming around like 2 or 3 large hubs, and Berlin is one of them, meaning that this is where all of these key players concentrate. So that's where the investors are based, that's the largest, most successful companies are based. But Warsaw seems to be one of these like satellite ecosystems where there is not so much going on, but there is a specialization around 1 or 2 topics, and where Berlin kind of acts as a connector to the rest of the world. So I like to explain this with a metaphor of international airports, meaning that if you want to fly from Warsaw to, let's say, Boston, you don't fly directly from Warsaw to Boston, because maintaining the flights on this line would not be economically viable. So for this reason, you fly from Warsaw to, let's say, London, from London to New York, from there to Boston. And ecosystems like Berlin, these central hubs, act in a similar way. So if you're based in Warsaw as a startup, or Prague, or one of these smaller ecosystems, and you want to connect to the rest of the world, to the investors, to the big startups, and so on, you go through one of the hubs like Berlin, London, Tel Aviv, New York, and so on.
Which event so far was the biggest one? Attendees.
Actually, our event in Athens was the largest, which was surprising because it's a fairly small ecosystem, but we had a really great team over there. So we probably had the largest number of attendees in Athens so far. Well, over 2,000 attendees over there, which was, last year we broke through 10,000 attendees across all of our events. Sure. No, I mean, they wouldn't necessarily be very happy about like a single person just randomly like walking into the office, but but when we approach them, we try to communicate the fact that first of all, it's a great way to show yourself as a great company to work for. So most of them see this as a recruitment/employer branding opportunity, but we also have a bunch of investors, press, and so on coming to these events. So for them, it's free exposure. apart from having a chance to recruit people. Now we're also trying to create more value for them and start answering the second problem, meaning that there are not enough relevant connections, by connecting the companies that are participating in the event, so across specific roles. So we want them to meet each other. So we want the CEOs from these companies to meet each other. We want CDOs to meet each other, and so on. So we start organizing like a small satellite events where we invite specific people from these companies to meet each other and connect. Cool. If there are no more questions, then thank you very much. And let's grab some beers.